Despite paying $5,000 every month to support my household, everything changed after my accident. When I returned home in a wheelchair, my cruel husband and mother-in-law pushed me out of the house, yelling, "You're useless now. We don't need a woman like you anymore." But what they didn't know was that I had a secret, one that would soon shake their world. Days later, when they discovered the truth, they came running back to me. What awaited them, however, was a shocking surprise. And what happened next was beyond anything they could have imagined. My name is Nancy, and I'm 32 years old. I work as an online entrepreneur, managing digital marketing campaigns for clients across the globe. This is a business I built from the ground up, and today, it provides me with a steady income of $10,000 per month. My work has given me financial independence, allowing me to live a life I once only dreamed of. Despite this success, my life at home tells a very different story. 3 years ago, I married Victor, a freelance graphic designer who seemed ambitious and driven at the time. Along with Victor, his mother, Lillian, became part of my life. At first, I believed we were building a home full of love and understanding. I first met Victor at a networking event 3 years ago. I had almost skipped it, thinking it wasn't worth my time, but a friend convinced me to go. She said I needed to get out of my comfort zone and meet new people. Little did I know, that evening would change my life. Victor stood out immediately. He was charming, confident, and had an easygoing demeanor that made him approachable. We struck up a conversation, and he told me about his work as a freelance graphic designer. He spoke passionately about his projects, sharing how he loved helping small businesses bring their ideas to life through design. I admired his creativity and his apparent ambition. We exchanged numbers that evening, and Victor reached out the very next day. Our conversations flowed naturally, and we quickly discovered we had a lot in common. He was attentive, kind, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. On our first date, he surprised me by remembering a detail I had casually mentioned, my favorite type of coffee. Small gestures like that made me believe he was someone special. Over the months that followed, our relationship deepened. Victor often talked about his dream of starting his own design agency, and I supported him wholeheartedly. I share my own goals of growing my online business, and he appeared to be equally supportive of my ambitions. For the first time, I felt like I had found a partner who understood and respected my drive. Victor proposed to me on a quiet evening at my favorite restaurant. He had planned every detail, down to the soft music playing in the background. His words were heartfelt, and the ring he offered was simple yet beautiful. I was overwhelmed with emotion as I said yes, believing I was about to start a life filled with love and mutual support. Our wedding was small but meaningful, attended by close friends and family. Walking down the aisle, I couldn't stop smiling. I was certain I had found someone who would walk beside me through life's ups and downs. Looking back now, those memories feel like they belong to someone else. The Victor the first knew during those early days feels like a distant stranger. I sometimes wonder if I missed the signs or if he changed along the way. Either way, the life I thought I was building with him turned out to be nothing more than a mirage. The first few months of marriage were pleasant. Victor and I settled into a comfortable routine, and his mother, Lillian, moved in with us shortly after the wedding. While I hadn't expected her to live with us permanently, I welcomed the idea, believing we could create a close-knit family. But the cracks began to show sooner than I anticipated. Lillian was critical of everything I did, from how I arranged the kitchen to how I spent my time working. She often commented that I wasn't a proper wife, despite my significant financial contributions. Her words stung, but I told myself it was just an adjustment phase. Victor, however, was a different story. At the start of our marriage, he seemed supportive, but that support quickly faded. His freelancing career, which had been inconsistent even before our wedding, started to falter. He began missing deadlines, losing clients, and making excuses. Instead of looking for more work, he spent most of his time at home, scrolling through his phone or complaining about how difficult the design industry was. When his income dried up entirely, I stepped up, increasing my contributions to the household. Every month, I handed over $5,000 to cover all our expenses, hoping it would ease the tension. But rather than appreciating my efforts, Victor and Lillian became even more demanding. They treated my earnings as an obligation rather than a contribution and dismissed my work as playing around on the internet. "You sit behind a screen all day," Victor said one evening, his tone laced with disdain. "That's not real work. You wouldn't survive in a real job." Lillian chimed in, her voice sharp. "He's right. A real wife would focus on her family, not some silly online hobby." Their words cut deep. I wanted to remind them that my silly online hobby was the only reason they had a roof over their heads. But instead, I swallowed my pride and stayed quiet, hoping to avoid another argument. As time went on, the criticisms escalated. If I came home late from a client meeting, they accused me of neglecting the family. If I took time for myself, they called me lazy. It felt like no matter what I did, I could never be enough for them. Victor's lack of effort became increasingly evident. He refused to find work, claiming the market was too competitive, while I shouldered all the financial responsibility. The man I had married, the one who dreamed of building a design agency, was gone, replaced by someone content to let me bear all the weight. Each day, the resentment I felt grew stronger. I began to wonder how much longer I could endure their relentless criticism and lack of gratitude. Deep down, I knew something had to give. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a client call, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, only to hear the somber voice of my father's lawyer on the other end. "Nancy, I'm sorry to inform you that your father passed away this morning." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My father had always been my quiet supporter, the one person who believed in me without question. With my mother already gone, his death felt like losing the last anchor of my childhood. I sat in silence for a long time, unable to process the loss. When I told Victor and Lillian, their reactions were far from comforting. Lillian barely looked up from her phone. "That's unfortunate," she said flatly. Victor shrugged and muttered, "I'm sorry to hear that," before turning back to the TV. Their indifference made the loss feel even heavier. The funeral was a quiet affair, attended by a few relatives and friends. As I stood by the graveside, a man approached me and introduced himself as my father's attorney. "Nancy, we need to talk," he said, handing me his card. "There's something your father wanted you to have." A few days later, I met with him in his office. What he revealed left me stunned. My father had left me a substantial inheritance, a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood and full ownership of his company, a small but successful business he had built over decades. I sat in silence as the lawyer laid out the details, overwhelmed by the weight of my father's final gift. The house was a symbol of stability, a place where I could finally find peace. The company, however, was a different kind of challenge. It was a thriving business, and the responsibility of managing it now rested entirely on my shoulders. But more than that, it was a chance to carve out a future for myself, a future free from the control of Victor and Lillian. I decided to keep the inheritance a secret. I knew how Victor and Lillian would react if they found out. They would find a way to exploit it, to drain me of every last resource, just as they had done with my income. This was my father's legacy, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. My father had believed in me, even when no one else did. And now, I was determined to honor his faith in me by building a life he would be proud of. The weeks following my father's funeral were a blur of emotions. Between the grief of his loss and the constant tension at home, I found myself running on empty. Victor and Lillian's treatment of me grew colder by the day. They dismissed my mourning as weakness, and my contributions to the household were met with more disdain than ever. I threw myself into work, desperate to stay afloat emotionally. One fateful afternoon, after finishing a grocery run, I was driving home when disaster struck. A speeding truck veered into my lane, slamming into my car. The impact was jarring, and the sound of screeching metal and shattering glass filled my ears. My car spun off the road, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by the hum of machines. The doctor explained that I had suffered a spinal injury, leaving me unable to walk. I stared at the ceiling, numb with disbelief. My life, which had already felt like it was unraveling, had taken another devastating turn. Victor and Lillian eventually showed up at the hospital, but their reactions only deepened my heartbreak. Instead of offering comfort or support, they seemed annoyed by the inconvenience my accident had caused them. "What are we supposed to do now?" Lillian muttered under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. Victor, true to form, said nothing. After a few days of recovery, I was discharged and sent home. Arriving at the house in a wheelchair felt like a cruel twist of fate. The place I had worked so hard to maintain now felt like a prison. Victor and Lillian wasted no time, making their feelings clear. "You're useless now," Lillian spat one evening, her tone colder than ever. "You can't even take care of yourself, let alone this house." Victor stood silently beside her, his silence speaking volumes. They made it clear that they no longer saw me as a part of their lives. Their cruelty culminated in the ultimate betrayal. They told me to leave. They didn't want the burden of caring for someone they deemed worthless. Heartbroken and humiliated, I packed my belongings and left the house I had kept afloat for years. As I sat in the cab taking me to the home my father had left me, I felt a mix of despair and determination. They had pushed me to my lowest point, but deep down I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would rebuild my life on my terms. Arriving at my father's house felt like stepping into a new world. The home was a testament to his hard work and love for detail, a spacious two-story house with large windows and a peaceful garden. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to start over. The first few weeks were difficult. Adjusting to life in a wheelchair was challenging, and the emotional weight of everything I'd been through still lingered. But I reminded myself of the promise I made in the cab that day. I wouldn't let Victor and Lillian's cruelty define me. This house, this inheritance, was a second chance, and I intended to make the most of it. My father's company became my focus. I spent hours poring over financial records, contracts, and reports, learning every detail of the business. It was daunting, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. My father had entrusted this company to me, and I was determined to honor his legacy. I hired a small but talented team to help me manage operations and strategy. With their support, I began expanding the business. We secured new clients, streamlined processes, and even opened a new office. The company, once a modest operation, started to grow beyond what even my father might have envisioned. Meanwhile, I began taking steps to remove Victor from my life entirely. Filing for divorce was a cathartic moment. I had been carrying the weight of our failed marriage for too long, and finally cutting those ties felt liberating. The lawyer handling my case assured me that I had a strong position, especially given Victor's neglect and cruelty after my accident. I also blocked all contact from Victor and Lillian. I didn't want them anywhere near my new life. They had drained me emotionally and financially for years, and I refused to let them have any part in the life I was building. Day by day, I found my strength returning, not just physically but emotionally. I learned to navigate my wheelchair with ease, and with therapy, I began regaining confidence in myself. Every small victory, whether it was completing a successful business deal or simply wheeling myself into the garden for some fresh air, felt like a triumph. This was my chance to rebuild, to reclaim my life on my terms. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. While I was busy rebuilding my life, Victor and Lillian's world began to crumble. Without my $5,000 monthly contributions, the financial stability they had taken for granted disappeared overnight. Victor's freelancing, which had always been sporadic, had entirely dried up. His lack of effort and unreliable reputation had caused him to lose his few remaining clients. Now, with no income, he was left floundering. Lillian, who had always prided herself on running the household, found herself powerless against the mounting bills. Their lavish spending habits, which they had never bothered to curb, quickly caught up with them. The creditors, once patient, started demanding payments. Late notices piled up, and their situation spiraled further out of control. It didn't take long for the inevitable to happen. The house I had once shared with them, the same house they had thrown me out of, was repossessed by the bank. Their belongings were seized, and they were left with no place to go. I heard snippets of their downfall through mutual acquaintances. Victor and Lillian were couch surfing with distant relatives, too ashamed to face the reality of their failure. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My father's company was expanding faster than I had imagined. New contracts and partnerships poured in, and the business reached heights that even I hadn't expected. I threw myself into my work, grateful for the opportunities my father had given me. Every milestone I achieved felt like a personal victory, a reminder of how far I'd come. But then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected message. Victor and Lillian wanted to see me. I wasn't surprised. With nowhere else to turn, they were coming back to the person they had belittled and abandoned. I agreed to meet them, not out of kindness, but out of curiosity. When they arrived at my home, their appearances startled me. Victor, once so proud and self-assured, looked gaunt and defeated. Lillian, always poised and polished, now seemed frail and desperate. They stood before me, pleading for help. "We've made mistakes," Victor said, his voice trembling. "But we're family, Nancy. Please, we have nowhere else to go." Lillian nodded, her usual sharp tongue replaced by a meekness I had never seen. "We were wrong," she whispered. "But you're the only one who can save us." I listened, silent, as they poured out their apologies. But I felt no sympathy. They had made their choices, and now they were paying the price. Victor and Lillian stood before me, their pleas echoing in the silence of my living room. For a moment, I let their desperation hang in the air, watching them shift uncomfortably under my gaze. They had come here expecting mercy, perhaps even forgiveness. But I wasn't the same woman they had discarded. "Nancy, we're sorry," Victor said, his voice cracking. "We didn't mean for things to get this bad. We made mistakes, but we need your help now." Lillian, the ever-proud matriarch, clasped her hands together in a gesture I had never seen from her. Humility. "You've always been stronger than we gave you credit for," she said softly. "Please, Nancy, give us a chance to make things right." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. For years, their words had cut me to the core, leaving scars I was only now beginning to heal. But standing here, in the home my father had entrusted to me, I felt a surge of power. They had underestimated me, and now they were at my mercy. "You want my help?" asked, my voice calm but firm. "Let me show you something first." I led them into my study, the place where I kept my most prized possession, the framed certificate of my ownership of my father's company. I watched as their eyes widened, taking in the evidence of my success. The spacious office, the awards on the shelves, and the photographs of me at business events painted a picture they had never imagined. "This," I said, pointing to the certificate, "is the company my father built and entrusted to me. I've turned it into something bigger than even he dreamed of. While you were tearing me down, I was building this." Victor's jaw dropped, and Lillian's face turned pale. "You own all this?" Victor stammered, unable to hide his disbelief. "Yes," I replied. "And the house you're standing in, it was part of his legacy too. A legacy I've honored, unlike the life you squandered." Their silence was deafening. They had come here thinking I was still the woman they could manipulate, the one they could control. But the reality before them was far from what they expected. "You threw me out when I needed you most," I continued, my voice cold. "Now you stand here, asking for help? You'll get nothing from me. Not now, not ever." With that, I turned to the door and opened it. "Leave," I said firmly. "And don't come back." As they shuffled out, defeated, I felt a sense of closure. I had risen above their cruelty, and for the first time, I was truly free. As I watched Victor and Lillian walk away, their heads hung low, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For years, I had endured their constant criticism, disrespect, and lack of appreciation. They had drained me emotionally, financially, and mentally. But now the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer their victim. I was the architect of my own life. The months that followed were some of the most rewarding of my life. My father's company continued to grow under my leadership. We secured major contracts, expanded into new markets, and even opened additional offices. Each milestone felt like a tribute to my father's belief in me. His legacy had become my driving force, and I was determined to honor it. Personally, I also began to heal. I committed myself to physical therapy and gradually gained more independence in my daily life. While I remained in a wheelchair, I learned to navigate the world with confidence and strength. My life was no longer defined by what I couldn't do, but by what I had achieved despite the challenges. Victor and Lillian's downfall became the talk of the town among mutual acquaintances. Their financial ruin, public eviction, and desperate state were no secret. They had been consumed by their arrogance and greed, and now they were left with nothing. I occasionally heard updates about them. They moved from shelter to shelter, unable to rebuild the life they had so recklessly destroyed. I had no sympathy for them. They had chosen this path with their cruelty and selfishness. While some might have found satisfaction in their misery, I didn't dwell on it. I was too focused on my own journey, too busy creating a life filled with purpose and success. One evening, as I sat in my study, I looked at the framed certificate of my company's ownership. It symbolized everything I had fought for: my independence, resilience, and the belief my father had in me. I thought about how far I had come, from being thrown out of a house I had financially supported to owning a thriving business and a beautiful home. This was my story, a story of betrayal, survival, and triumph. I had turned pain into power and rejection into resilience. I had proven, not to Victor or Lillian, but to myself, that I was capable of rising above anything life threw at me. As I closed my laptop that night, I smiled. My life was mine now, and the future was filled with endless possibilities. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next one.